the next 60 minutes. And well, this live session is organized by the project OpenDI. OpenDI is a European funded project. And today's topic we want to discuss with 3 experts is the topic of data spaces. You might have recognized that many national governments, but also the European Commission, started to talk about data spaces since maybe 1 or 2 years. Data spaces are foreseen to deal with data sovereignty. And international data spaces already started in the year 2016 to discuss this topic and to come up with an approach which guarantees data sovereignty. And exactly this will be our topic today. So we have 3 experts today in the live session, and I want to introduce these 3 experts. The first one is Giorgio Micoletti from IDC in Italy. He's also the project coordinator of the OpenDI project. And up front, we will have a 10 minutes pitch of Giorgio on explaining us the OpenDI project and its target groups and activities. Afterwards, we will have Lars Nagel. Lars Nagel is my dear colleague in IDSA. He's the CEO of IDSA. And Lars will explain us how international data spaces reference architecture model enables data spaces and data sovereignty. Afterwards, Sebastian Steinbus, who is the CTO of IDSA, will explain a little bit more in detail how data sovereignty can be reached and how the connections between data spaces and data sovereignty work. Buzzwords like usage control are in the focus of this input, and Sebastian will do his very best to explain us and to guide us in this direction. Okay, I will stop now and hand over to Giorgio to go ahead with his introduction on the OpenDI project. Giorgio, please. Maybe we always need 1 or 2 minutes between each speaker, but Giorgio, it's up to you, and you can also share your screen with us.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you all. Thank you, Thorsten. Thank you, Sylvia, for organizing this. I see that actually we have 120 plus participants, which is, in my opinion, a very good result. So thanks a lot. I'll share my screen. Thanks a lot. So again, thanks a lot for you, all of you. This is the first of an initial series of 4 webinars organized by OpenDI, and it's part of the coordinating and support actions that OpenDI represents, and it's within the framework of the digital transformation topics that, as you know, the European Commission is currently funding and underpinning under the ongoing Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. My name is Giorgio Micoletti. I'm from IDC, and as Thorsten said, I'm coordinating the this OpenDI project. So I will move to the next slide. So what is OpenDI? In fact, OpenDI is a supporting coordination action that started in June 2019. It lasts for 36 months, so it will go on for the next 2 years. And it represents actually 9 beneficiaries. So we have 9 partners taking part of this coordination and supporting action. We've got IDC, as I said, so the coordinator. We've got International Data Spaces Association. So thank you to Thorsten, Sebastian, and Lars, and Sylvia also for representing and being the major, I would say, speaker in this context. We've got 2 technical partners, so the Fireware Foundations and Atos, and engineering as well, so 3 technical partners. And we have also 4 partners who are specifically devoted to focus on 4 domains, as we call them. So 4 sectors, 4 industry sectors where this supporting and coordination actions is actually active, and I will spend a few words on this. So we've got Innovalia taking care of the manufacturing sector. We've got ITEL for the health and care sector. We've got the Technical University of Aachen in Germany, so RWTH, for the energy sector. And we've got in Italy Tecnoalimenti for the agri-food sector. Where Open DEI, so where does this come from and what is the background of all this? Well, the trick here is the DEI acronym here. So DEI stands for Digitizing European Industry. Digitizing European Industry is a strategy that the European Commission launched exactly 4 years ago. It was in April 2016, and the main aim of this initiative and strategy is to make sure that essentially the use of digital technologies are made possible across every industry in Europe by all types of companies and organizations in across all sectors in Europe. Why? Because we need to obviously protect and I would say increase our competitiveness and strengthen our competitiveness as Europeans vis-a-vis other regions of the world where the digitization process is up and running, and we don't want to miss anything out here, and we need coordination at EU and national level. So moving to the next slide, some additional words on the Digitizing European Industry initiative. I'm not going into detail, of course, but the attention that I would like to draw to you today is on this nice picture, the circle that you see in the middle of this slide, and areas, or if you see that there are 4 focus areas, as use the European Commission jargon here. So the European, the first sector here on top right, then it's also taking care of skills and jobs. It's also addressing the regulatory issues and the framework underpinning the digitization in Europe. And there is also a specific focus area on digital innovation hubs. Where does Open DEI stand in all of this? Well, it stands in the first top right corner of this picture. So in the partnership and platforms, and specifically on the platforms and pilots topic. This is, I think, important to understand and to underline, because this is where most of what we're going to hear today is actually related to. So we're talking platforms and different pilots of different projects that are developing platforms. We are necessarily talking about data sharing. So we are exchanging data. In order to do this, we'll have to need a solid data ecosystem. We need a solid data sharing infrastructures, and ultimately, we're talking here about a common data space, right? And this is exactly what our colleagues from IDSA are going to develop in the next few minutes. So moving to the next slide, well, Open DEI as a project, as I said, is part of this focus area on platforms and pilots, but it's not alone, as you can see in these slides, and according to the bullets points that are indicated here. It's not alone in the sense that the platforms and pilots focus area touches upon a wealth of different topics. We're going from digital manufacturing platforms for connected smart factories to platforms for the agricultural rural sector, but we also include energy elements like smart homes and smart grids and big data solutions for the energy sectors. And clearly we touch upon the health and care sectors, just to name a few. But in order to make sense of all of this, and I would say to work across this varied and I would say kind of complicated environment, then we need some sort of coordination. We need an horizontal layer that coordinates all these initiatives and funded initiatives in the areas that I just mentioned. And we need this coordination because we need to identify the synergies among all these initiatives and projects. We need to avoid duplications, overlapping. We need to exploit the common outcomes from all these projects. Clearly, we need to prioritize and make sure that we do not reinvent the wheel all the times. And we need a promotion of the results coming out of these projects in a coordinated fashion in order to cross-fertilize and leverage on the lessons learned. And this is precisely the role of Open DEI as a supporting and coordination action. So moving to the next slides, a few more detail of Open DEI in terms of topics that is currently developing and delving into. We've got different topics and different issues, but in particular, I would like to draw your attention on the fact that OpenDI is working and will work even more in the next few months on aspects like the common architectures and reference architectures across all these platforms in the different projects. We are discussing and how to improve the interoperability and the standard issues related to these platforms. And again, the elements of data here is of paramount importance. We're also developing common methodologies for designing, testing, and validating the different results of the projects in scope. In order to measure somehow the impact coming out of these projects. And once again, we need to promote the results and make sure that there is a vibrant ecosystem, so an ecosystem that takes advantage, but at the same time that leverages all these results and transfer these results and this information. Moving to the next slide. So how are we going to do this? Again, I'm not going into the details of how we are organized or all our internal cuisine. It's probably not relevant for this audience and at this stage. But essentially, I'd like to stress the fact that OpenDI has taken since the beginning what we call a fourfold approach. So we have 4 main areas that are taken care of by our partners and are divided into 4 different work packages. Again, to use the jargon that is in use in these types of actions and projects. So if we start from the top right hand side, so from the left top hand side, so we've got the work package 2 that is looking at the Digital Platforms Federation. So here we need to make sure that there is interoperability frameworks and there are reference architectures to make sure that the platforms can liaise with each other. There is another, if we move to the right, there's another work package that looks into the pilots, all these projects in all the areas that I highlighted before. Here we need, in a sense, to map what is out there. So who are all these projects, what they do. We need to keep track of them, track the results, and also provide some sort of benchmarking, not just to say who is good and who is bad, but I mean to understand who is doing this and who is there, and provide some comparison, some framework for comparison of all these projects. Then if we move to the left bottom, then we have a specific work package, so an area that is taking care of the ecosystem. So here, the magic word, as you know, when we talk about ecosystem, is to make a vibrant ecosystem. So if we want to make a vibrant ecosystem, then we need to make sure that this ecosystem is regularly engaged, and that we have tools to constantly transfer the results and make sure that there is a constant dialogue among all these projects. And then we have another area that is the related to standardizations and interoperability, not because we want to invent and create yet a new standard. This is not our purpose, but we want to facilitate the usage of a common or set of common standards that are already out there. We want to identify what is the best and how we can promote and make sure that these standards are applied across the whole platform and pilots focus areas. We have finally the big one in the middle here, a specific work package dedicated to dissemination and communications, precisely because what we produce needs to be cross-fertilized and made aware. We need to make awareness, create awareness around ours and others' results as well. These two areas are particularly so. Both the standardizations and specifically this work package 6 on dissemination and communications is the part of work where this webinar and this series of webinars is organized. One more slide, if I can change. Okay, I said we take a fourfold approach. Now, this fourfold approach applies also from the sectoral perspective. So we're looking into, as I said at the beginning, when presenting the different partners and beneficiaries of this supporting and coordination action, or Open DEI. So we're looking in particular of 4 different sectors. We've got the manufacturing area, we've got the agri-food sectors, we got the energy sectors, and we got the health and care sectors. Now, all these sectors are populated by a series of projects. We count at the moment of talking 26 plus projects that we have under our remit in terms of coordination. Some of these projects are slowly coming to an end. Others have just begun. So there is an element of complexity also here in coordinating all these different interventions, and that's why that's one of the other reasons why we are here. And I think with that, I've provided some basic introduction to the project. I'm not sure how it works with the Q&A, but I guess this will be at the end, so I'm more than happy to take questions probably when we have this session at the end.
Exactly, Giorgio. Thank you very much from my side to giving this framework. And you rightly said, digitizing European industries started already some years ago, and what we witnessed this year in February is a little bit more specific focus when we are talking about platforms. Data comes into our mind, and the data strategy, which I mentioned from the European Commission, is one element in Europe what we witnessed. And there the topic of data spaces is addressed, and IDSA, as the International Data Spaces Association, is dealing with this topic from the very beginning. And therefore, it's now my pleasure to introduce Lars Nagel and to hand over to you, Lars. You have to unmute your mic, and then the floor is yours, and then you also can share your screen, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy that you joined this live session this afternoon, and I'm overwhelmed by the large number of participants. And I'm really looking forward to talk about Open DEI, which is probably a very relevant project for making the European strategy for data happen. And I would like to talk about this European strategy for data and data in itself. So there are a lot of comparisons what data is for the future economy. So it's the new oil, it's the new gold, or whatever. I don't care. What we definitely all understand, and where we are on the same page, is that data is of value, and that there are a lot of data treasures hidden in companies and in ecosystems, and we should really use these data treasures jointly in more value creation, and this will form the future data economy in Europe. And this future data economy is mainly created by sharing data, so linking data sets, sharing data without regret, and staying in control over the flow of your data, so that everyone is really easy in sharing data, and we can really benefit all from sharing data. So the European Commission published the strategy for data, and the main aspect there is that it's all about the flow of data, and it's across sectors, and all the data sharing should take place on the base of the FAIR principles, and we have to talk about access, management, and use of data. Okay, so the main pillars of the European strategy for data are described in the first paragraph. So, well, the main goal is to increase the availability of large pools of data. Then, obviously, an infrastructure to use and exchange data shall be brought into place, and the Commission asks for appropriate governance mechanisms. Okay, I think we have some in place, and that is what I'm talking about today. Furthermore, the Commission thinks of well, funding and promoting 9 data spaces in key sectors which are already known and which shall be well, further proliferated as they are a main pillar of the European economy. So from manufacturing, mobility, health to finance, energy, and so on. Okay, well, my question would be how to realize this. What can we now really do in order to create this one European data space and not having, like, again, 9 silos in separate data spaces? Okay, so my idea would be that we need a common design principle for data spaces. So these are all data spaces. Every data space contains data which are of value, and everyone wants to share and combine and manipulate data in order to create value. Okay, so obviously they have something in common. The International Data Spaces Association came up with a reference architecture, and we worked on this for 5 years now with more than 100 of companies and organizations from 20 countries. And we can provide an open reference architecture which can set the framework conditions for these data spaces, which is based on standards that we rely on and that are written by institutions from all over the world which we are connected with. We will provide a trust framework and a scheme for data sharing, which powers companies or ecosystems to set up these data spaces. And we coordinate operations for essential data sovereignty services, which are needed to bring trust into these ecosystems, for example, digital identities or certification. With this in place, we can really speak of open distributed data ecosystems and marketplaces. So this will be a blueprint for this, ensuring data sovereignty for the creator or the originator of data, providing data provenance throughout the whole end-to-end data supply chain, audit-proof if requested, and definitely based on European values. So that is what we already have in place and what we want to distribute via OpenDI, for example. Okay, having a look at these data spaces. So what are data spaces? Where can we place them? I would like to give it a place in the whole architecture stack of digital ecosystems. So have a look at this view graph here. You see all the domains on the top of the picture. So they are at the end users of a digital ecosystem, and they need a certain infrastructure. So they need platforms and market-specific solutions. They need a data sharing layer, a data sharing infrastructure. They need a cloud or edge infrastructure, and they definitely need networks and devices. And when we are talking about data spaces, then we are talking about this very light blue layer in the architecture. When we're talking about Gaia X, for example, then we're talking about the cloud edge infrastructure. When we're talking about 5G, then we're talking about the network level at the bottom, and when we're talking about AI for EU, for example, then we are talking about the service platform layer on the top. So just to give it a place in today's economy. Well, let's talk about data spaces. Data spaces, they are the place to be. They are clean rooms for a prospering data economy. So you can very defined bring or access these data spaces, and then you are in these data spaces, you are sure that there's a certain governance in these data spaces. You can trustworthily manipulate data, share data, and create value with your partners in your ecosystems, and define, for example, usage constraints. So let's make a deep dive in, well, the view on data spaces. So the idea of a data space is to combine, to link all kinds of data endpoints. So when talking about the data space, we have to talk about data which is provided at completely different sources. So this data can be provisioned on an open data source, for example. They can be provisioned on a data marketplace, in an IoT cloud, or just from a sensor or a mobile device. And all these data endpoints, the sum of all these data endpoints, they create or define a data space. And this is one picture how such a data space can look like, and you see this is an industrial or manufacturing scenario. So there are a lot of different data endpoints, a lot of IT systems involved, and each of these items you can see on the picture is brought to this data space by a different company. So you see that this is the linking of data endpoints from a lot of partners in one ecosystem. And the data sources are really different. So we are talking about data streams, we are talking about just a data set, and completely different kinds of data, and each of these has a completely different value. Okay, so this is a data space. And now again, let's have a look at the European strategy for data. Obviously, there are at least 9 data spaces which shall be brought up. And we know that there will be a lot more data spaces out there. So a data space can be something very small. It can be also a closed shop idea. It can be a little bit bigger, so just a company and its ecosystem, and it can be a data space for a whole domain. And the idea behind data spaces is that the concept, the reference architecture, works for all these usage scenarios. So you are free to use the design principle, the reference architecture, for a very small data sharing scenario and for a very big one, for example, also for all these 9 data spaces in key sectors. What the core goal is, no silos. We do not want more silos. We want to eliminate the silos. We want to enlarge the data pool so that European data economy can use more data for better AI, for better insights and all of this. And we definitely have to foster cross-sectoral benefits. And what we proposed to all of you via OpenDI is to have a look at these design principles for data spaces so that we really can ensure data sovereignty within these data sharing scenarios. And we see that there are 3 main things that we have to take into consideration, where Sebastian Steinbus will go in detail later on. So the one thing is we have to really link every imaginable data endpoint. So we have to create endless connectivity. Then when talking about data spaces and different IT systems, different companies, there's no longer, and this is good, no longer the man in the middle. So we are talking about federated approach. So there's no one who can provide the initial trust. There's no focal company anymore. So we have to talk about trust between different security domains, and we have to talk about really comprehensive security functions if needed. And you can decide what data sharing scenario you want to have. And then we have to come up with a governance for the data economy. So really talk about, okay, I share a valuable data set, and we have to talk about usage control and enforcement of usage control concepts. And this has to be brought into place. And our proposal is, via OpenDI and via other activities, to use the same design principle for data spaces in each of the named 9 data spaces, and also in future European projects, just suggesting, okay, have a look at this. Please shape your project, your platform, your data sharing scenario, whatever you do, according to this idea, so then you can be sure everything's in place, and you will really can use data sovereignty. So what I don't want to go into detail with this. You see the 3 main pillars of the design principles, and we try to match it. So this is derived from our reference architecture. We try to combine it or merge it with other concepts which are already known. For example, the 9 building blocks from InnoPay, and then you can come up with this idea. So when talking about data spaces, and talking about connectivity, okay, what do you have to take into consideration? You have to talk about metadata description. You have to talk about APIs on data exchange, for example, but you have also to talk about data standards and formats. And what you can see here on these levels is that some of these requirements are generic, so really domain agnostic. Then there are some domain-specific issues, and then really business case-specific issues. For example, when talking about the governance at the very right part of the view graph, so the IDS reference architecture is talking about the generic governance. Then we also include domain-specific governance models. For example, the asset administration shell in the manufacturing sector and other things, so that must be included. And then there are probably also things which are tackled by every company itself to be taken into consideration. So have a look at these design principles for data spaces. Then we can make sure also in the European project, so for the representatives from the commissions in this call, let's take this as a fundamental design principle for future projects and data spaces. Then we can really make sure that things are interoperable, and we can really benefit from the European data space. So let's build data spaces, and please, let's make life easy by using these common design principles. We think that IDS is a very good starting point. Let's discuss this further and learn, and via OpenDI project we can really get in touch with a lot of projects, and we hope also with the Commission. I'm looking forward to this because, well, we all see the value in data sharing. Data sharing is better than playing alone, and I'm looking forward to this, and I'm looking forward to the question and answer later on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lars, for this input. It is a very good starting point also to relate the different topics from data platforms and data spaces to data sovereignty, which are discussed in all these projects and which are of high relevance of all national and also the European digital strategy. As we obviously wouldn't have time later on to let everyone ask one question, I would encourage you to use also the GoToMeeting chat. So if you have obviously a very important question, so please use the chat and we will collect this and then come either in the discussion or after this live session bilaterally back to you to answer your questions. So please make use of this chat. Lars, let me just ask you one question. Is it right that this understanding, when we were talking, or when we have talked throughout the last years, very much about data platforms, your argument is to come from data platforms to data spaces. It would be good to have all these data platforms not only focusing on interoperability, because this was done, I think, in the last years very much, but also about this data governance principles, because then between maybe different platforms within either one sector or within many sectors, we could come up with building data spaces and maybe pull out of these the real added value of data. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I would just add that so I showed this three aspects of the design principle. So when talking about the platforms in the past, then we were mostly focusing on the left part, so connectivity and interoperability, and we were not talking too much about trust. Because when we're talking about combining two platforms, two IoT systems, whatever, then we have to talk about trust between platforms. And then the third is we really have to talk about the governance. So when the data sets, the asset data moves from one platform to another, from one company to another, then this data set is left alone. It's like if you have a kid and it drives with a bike in the street. So you must be really be sure that that your kid is resilient and that it can cope with any situation which may occur. And it's the same with data sets. So the data set is no longer bound to the platform, it moves. And so we have to talk about governance, usage control, and all of these issues.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I will just come back to one question in the chat, because Mark Losch from the health sector asked if you could maybe just define very briefly the understanding of data sovereignty, that everyone knows, because this is the base what we are talking about. So maybe just one sentence on this.
Well, data sovereignty means that you, as an originator of the data, stay in control about the flow of the data and what happens through a whole supply chain, in the whole value creation chain. Today, it is often like this: data is provided somehow, and then so it is merged with other data sets, linked, and then applications are doing some manipulation on this data, and then an insight is produced, and then with this insight you can earn money. But very often the data provenance, so who was the originator of the data, who really contributed to this shared value creation, got lost. And data sovereignty is the opportunity to change this situation, so to define, okay, who delivered which part of the value in such a data sharing ecosystem, and to make sure that you can decide who may do what with my data set, and perhaps there are some restrictions, constraints, or whatever.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And now we want to go a little bit deeper into 2 or 3 aspects of the data spaces approach of IDS, and therefore I welcome warmly my colleague Sebastian Steinbus, who is the CTO of IDSA, and he will explain us how this, what Lars just explained, will be supported by different enabling technologies. Sebastian, welcome, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thorsten. Thanks to all of you for joining today. Yeah, and thanks for the good words of all the presenters before. Yes, I will go a little bit deeper into the technical details of the International Data Spaces Reference Architecture models and of the core technical concepts of the IDS. And I saw a few questions flowing through the chat window I think I can pick up a few of your questions during my talk. So we already started there. So the IDSA, we defined a reference architecture. Of course, we also define something like interfaces. We are working on a contractual framework, and we do also provide sample code. We are not an open source association, but at least we provide a sample code. But the most important thing is reference architecture. A reference architecture really as a blueprint to create data spaces and one data space, however you name it. And you saw this picture already in last presentation before. This is a data space, one data space. And you can see that this data space is bringing together different existing platforms. It's not the one, the new platform, the next platform, the one to rule them all, but a system, a concept to bring those different systems together. To bring those different systems together, we defined a very generic scheme of the different roles inside the international data spaces and how to share data between different participants. Of course, we have details of the international data spaces reference architecture models and of the core technical concepts of the IDS. And I saw a few questions flowing through the chat window. I think I can pick up a few of your questions during my talk. So we already started there. So the IDSA, we defined a reference architecture. Of course, we also defined something like interfaces. We are working on a contractual framework, and we do also provide sample code. We are not an open source association, but at least we provide a sample code. But the most important thing is reference architecture. A reference architecture really as a blueprint to create data spaces and one data space, however you name it. And you saw this picture already in last presentation before. This is a data space, one data space. And you can see that this data space is bringing together different existing platforms. It's not the one, the new platform, the next platform, the one to rule them all, but a system, a concept to bring those different systems together. To bring those different systems together, we defined a very generic scheme of the different roles inside the international data spaces and how to share data between different participants. Of course, we do see the data provider and the data consumer on the other side. So one that provides the data and the other one that consumes the data. So, and as you can clearly see, there is no man in the middle between the data provider and the data consumer. And we do see that the data provider provides the data of the so-called data owner. When you come from a legal perspective, there is nothing like data ownership. But I'm very sure that you clearly understand who is the owner of the data when we use this word. It's not so clear anymore to anyone when we talk about a data sovereign or something like this. And if there is only the connection between the data provider and the data consumer, you have to find each other. And therefore, we created the role of the so-called broker service provider, the metadata broker. The idea here is that you can register the data that you want to provide into the data space or into data spaces. That's this metadata broker. Publish your metadata. I do provide data of this kind. And a data consumer can search for this. To support really business and economics inside the data spaces, we provide the so-called clearinghouse. You can make use of an audit log here for clearing, for settling, or for going to court after a data transaction. And we also see the need for apps, for an app store, something like this, so that the data can really get put into usage, into use inside the trusted runtime environment, the so-called IDS connector. This is a very general idea of the IDS, of the data spaces. And you already saw this on last slides. So there are basically 3 different USPs that we do see and 3 different requirements that you need to create a data space. Of course, you need interoperability. Every system inside this data space has to be able to communicate with every other system. And in the first term, because we are talking about data sovereignty, you have to understand what is on the other side, who is on the other side. And so we focus here on interoperability on metadata level. Therefore, we created a metadata model, the IDS information model, an ontology that defines what kind of data do you offer, and with which service interface do you provide to consume the data or to use the data, and who do you are. What kind of company are you? What capabilities do you have to maintain my data? And of course, we do explain how data can be seen as an asset, as a commodity. I will come back to this in a few slides. And then the second important thing is to provide trust between those different security domains. And of course, here one of the most important aspects is certification. So we have to identify how trustworthy is the technology that is used. Does it follow best practice on secure software engineering or not? And how trustworthy is the operational environment, the participant in the IDS? And this is transparently visible to everyone. So you can see how trustworthy this one is. And you can decide, will I give my data to this party or not? And is he capable to take care of my data or not? This is the most important things really to establish trust between different security domains. And the third thing is to really create a comprehensive governance model in this data space. Of course, in the meaning of technical enforcement of usage policies, providing usage policies and enforcing them technically, but of course also to provide organizational measures and legal measures on top of this for things that cannot be enforced in technology. As already said, the IDS information model is provided as an ontology, so the leading model here is a declarative model, an RDF graph, and we do explain it, of course, on a conceptual level as a UML model. And you can see that we have 6 different concerns that we are covering. The easiest one is, of course, the communication part. So what kind of operations, what kind of endpoints, and what kind of messages are used to exchange data. Where we do provide context, the context in where in space and time was the data created or can be used, what kind of content will be provided, what kind of resources, what kind of representations, is it a CSV file, is it XML, is it a JSON, and so on and so forth. And we can describe the concept in a very generic way. Here we can link the specific concept that is used to describe the payload data. The IDS information model does not describe the payload of the data, but the generic concept. And you can link your tangible concept, your asset administration shell, your HL7 data, whatever, to this IDS information model. And we see the so-called community of trust. Based on certification and based on the essential IDS services, you can identify who is the participant, if it is required to know who the participant is, or see, what capabilities does he have? How secure is the system? How secure is this environment? Am I willing to share my data with this one? And if, under which conditions? And then, this is really a new aspect, data as a commodity. What is the provenance of the data? Where did it came from? From which data sets was it derived? What kind of quality is related to this data? What policies, which usage policies are associated to this data sets? And of course, what is the pricing of this data? In general, as already said, the data exchange between 2 so-called IDS connectors, the connectors as trustworthy data runtimes, there is only the data exchange between 2 connectors. And the broker, the metadata broker, only knows about metadata. And you do not need the metadata broker at all to exchange data in a data space. You can also directly connect to each other if you know the other's endpoint. The good thing is everything that works between 2 connectors will work between every third connector in the same way because you're relying on a standard. And as the IDS connector is a trustworthy runtime, it is certified, certain security measures are on top of this. You may specify usage policy that your data may not leave this trustworthy runtime. So if the data may not leave this trustworthy runtime, but you want to make use of the data, you have to put the business logic inside your connector. And this is why we see something like an app store. You can put the business logic inside the connector and do the analytics. In the connector of the data consumer, And of course, also in the connector of the data provider. Maybe your data is too large or too sensible to share it. Then the data consumer could send his algorithm to the connector of the data provider and analyze the data there in situ. Because we do have to see that there are so many different kinds of data spaces, we have defined for now 4 different security profiles. Basically, it's 2 different security profiles, a base profile and a trust profile. The base profile, the general base profile, is an easy starting profile with not too many high requirements, easy to start, but not that trustworthy. So maybe you might think about sharing your important data with a base connector. But there are a lot of use cases where standardized data sharing is required and important, but trustworthiness is not required on a higher level. So a connector that fits the base requirements might be sufficient. For other scenarios, we need more security, more trustworthiness, and therefore we have the trust profile. The trust profile is, of course, interoperable with the base connector and with the Trust Plus connector. But he definitely implements enhanced mechanisms for usage policy enforcement and higher security levels. This is important for more important data. And then we have this Trust Plus or Managed Trust Plus profile, where you don't have access to your connector at all because you're a service provider and the connector that you're providing will not run inside your own environment, but maybe at your customer side. And then we have the so-called base-free profile, or something like a do-it-yourself profile. So you can implement whatever you like there, because this base-free connector will not be able to connect to a base, a trust, or a managed trust connector, as it will not be certified. But you can use the things that are important from your perspective, from your use case, from your data space, for your data space. Make use of the IDS concepts, but you don't have to be certified. But if you do so, if you implement the IDS concepts, it's an easy way to get a certification and then be part of the global data space. Coming back to the usage policies, sometimes access control that we're talking today about is not enough. You want to also manage the access to your data after it has left your own data center. I have here an example in an industrial data space. If you have a CAD data, configuration parameters, product volume, you may provide this data to another company, but only for a certain kind of machine. Or if you provide a CAD file, then you want to have it deleted after the first use, after it was printed in additive manufacturing or used in any other system. And of course, from the same machines, you may want to provide data for maintenance, for cooperative maintenance. But then you also want to provide the content. It's only for maintenance. It's only for maintenance of the machines and to provide predictive maintenance models, but maybe it's not for benchmarking, which machine performs best. So we can provide this usage policies, and I will explain a little bit in detail how this works. What we can do today typically is access control, but we are not really able to express complex conditions, and there are only those binaries, yes or no decisions. I will give access to my data or will not give access to my data. Maybe we can work about the application context that a certain system or software may use the data, or if you have a certain role in the Active Directory, you may assess something. With attribute-based access control, we can do a lot of more things. For example, we can specify the security policies have to be up to date. And if you're working on a tablet, you will not get access because you might be in a train and not in your office and so on and so forth. So you can really build complex things. But after you've given access to your data, you can do with the data whatever you want to do. We want to change this. We want to really enable usage policy enforcement, so that maybe the decision is not only giving access or not, but also, yes, give access, but only for 3 days. But yes, and if the data is used, inform the owner in a GDPR-related scenario, or is the same for no. No, you may not use the data, but we have to inform someone. For example, in a GDPR-related scenario or in other scenarios, and so on and so forth. And this is something that we do really need when we really want to bring together data from different companies and mix and reassemble data to create real cool, smart new value out of this. So what do we need for this, and what are we working on? The first very important thing is that we need a language for the specification of data sovereignty, of these usage policies. They have to be interoperable. They have to be understandable by a human and by a machine, and have to be interoperable, understandable. And the second thing is that we do need technology for the technical implementation of data sovereignty. And we want to push the limit here. We want to have as much technical enforcement as possible. But we are aware that we cannot enforce everything in technology. We can do a lot, and the more you want to do, the more expensive and the more complex it becomes. So, but we can do a lot, and there are technical frameworks also in place. But our main focus is still the language and the specification of different usage policies. And how does this fit to the whole concepts of data spaces and into general company strategy? So first of all, you as a company do need data. You need correct data. You need to know where does the data came from. You need to know about the pricing, about the usage policies of the data. So the generation and the processing of the data and the exchange through the internet is very, very important. And this is where the IDS really helps and supports you for your new use cases. And then we have technologies like 5G. We need interconnection. We need really availability and connectivity between different companies, between different countries to exchange data. And then we need this always available computing and storage system. We need cloud-based systems, for example. We need data steers where we can bring together different data sets and work on this. And if we do have all this data, then we can do cool new AI, like, for example, in platforms that are developed in AIs for EU. So that was my part.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you very much for this really deep dive into some of the main IDS enabling technologies. Let me just briefly pull or pick 3 questions out of the chat, which might be of importance, 2 for Sebastian and 2 for Lars. So the GDPR issue was again asked in the chat. You mentioned it, Sebastian. So the relation between IDS and GDPR, is it possible to summarize in 1 question?
Yes, it is easily possible to summarize this. So IDS is a lot of technical measures that we do provide. And GDPR-related issues are mostly organizational related. So IDS can support with technical measures to fulfill GDPR requirements. For example, by having encrypted transfer. Encrypted transfer is default in IDS, and this would be required. And that we do have this auditable logs and so on. So we have technical measures, but most GDPR things are organizational related. And there are other certificates, other projects that do support on those organizational issues.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And the second question for you, I think it comes also from the health sector, data of individuals. How are data of individuals, for instance, patients, treated by the IDSA concept or approach?
So we do not really specify, as already said, what the payload of IDS is. But we can do several things. For example, we can specify usage policies. And this is another usage policy use case that I omit in my slides. For example, when you make analytics on patient records, that they have to be pseudonymized or anonymized, and we can specify this, that they have to be done so when leaving the connector or when entering another connector, that you do have to do a certain processing, then afterwards it will be anonymized. So these are things that we can really do and support. And there are concepts people are working on in one of our communities, the so-called medical data space, where there is detailed work on medical data and on patients' data.
Okay, thank you for this short answer. Then I want to pick 1 question, which I want to ask Lars. When we, there's 1 question which relates to IDS as a cooking book. And the question is it just to engage with IDS? Maybe you could also explain who will use IDS technologies or IDS concepts. Maybe this is a question for you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I also saw this question, so thanks a lot. Well, definitely, yes, we want to provide a cookbook, but we are not the cooks and we do not run a restaurant. So the IDS reference architecture is a reference architecture which is in the first technology agnostic. In the IDS association, which is a not-for-profit association, everyone is free to join, and we have a lot of companies there which are building solutions upon this reference architecture and bringing this into concrete solutions, be it services, platforms, whatever. So this is currently going on, and we have an activity which is called the Launching Coalition. So there will be companies out there which will provide services or components, for example, the connector with IDS inside, and this is then certified by third parties that this is done according to the reference architecture. And I read also this question. So who takes over the certification? Well, this is again open to companies out there who are used to do it. For example, PricewaterhouseCoopers or TÜV organizations in Germany, and all these testing and evaluation facilities all over, so in every country, they are free to certify these components as long as they are approved by IDSA, stating that they follow the rules of procedure and the value proposition which I mentioned, and there will be a lot of evaluation facilities, and probably in each country it will be different.
Okay, perfect. And then the last question with a very short answer, please. How is the relation between IDS and Gaia X?
Yeah, I also read that. So I once referred to it. I have this architecture stack for digital ecosystems, and there's this data infrastructure layer, and these are the data spaces, and Gaia X is beneath. So talking about the cloud and edge devices and the nodes where the data is stored. So it's a little bit like Gaia X is focusing on data in rest, while IDS is focusing on data in motion, so talking about usage of data and all of this, while data is shared. And when you want to talk about, okay, where to store data, so following European law and European values, and you don't want to have it on one US or Chinese cloud, then this is the issue of Gaia. So when talking about digital sovereignty, it's about data sovereignty and cloud sovereignty. And if you merge this, this is merging IDS and Gaia, and we are in a very close relationship. And this is probably a very good idea when it comes to a really comprehensive view on digital sovereignty.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lars, for this answer. The rest of the questions in the chat will be answered bilaterally, and there are also sometimes some hints. We will uptake this and discuss it in the OpenDI context, but also in the IDS context. Thank you very much, Lars, Giorgio, and Sebastian, for this comprehensive overview. And I will hand over to Sylvia, because Sylvia has some announcements to do. I just want to point to the IDSA Virtual Expo next week, because we have another additional European project. It is the Trusts project, and this will be then the sequel of live events, which will discuss in the following weeks and months further this topic of data spaces. Sylvia, please, some last announcements from your side.
Thank you, Thorsten. And just very quick, because we are out of the time. And in OpenDI, as Giorgio has presented before, we support the different projects that has been presented, and also the stakeholders and other communities. And we have proposed this communication governance that Giorgio explained, We are working on verticals in 4 domains, and we have the ambassadors. We are coordinating the working groups in these domains, but we have commented and we have been explained it is important the data sharing in these fields and the data platform. So we propose to start a task force with this proposal. And we have asked to the registration, from the registration process, about the interest on this task force to cross-sectorial collaboration around data platforms, data sharing, and the answer was positive. So we will go ahead with this task force and propose a collaboration. The main objective of this task force, could say, is to analyze and discuss a common challenge for data sharing and coordinate the work together in also to overcome this challenge, identify the needs for effective governance of data sharing, and at the same time sharing knowledge and best practice and create this network of cross-sectorial data sharing stakeholders. And finally, but not less, develop recommendation for upcoming policies from European Commission, and also to standardization bodies, because this is one of the proposals. When you registered, we asked about 8 possible topics that are aligned with this data space framework that has been presented, and I want to share with you the results of these questions and which are the hot topics or prioritized topics from your side. And we see in the first positions the process for data exchange, defining these processes, the data-driven scenarios that are necessary, the roles and interaction, and also against the standards for data interoperability. So we will see how to address these topics in the task force, and just starting with a development initiative to all together to participate in this consultation that probably you are aware. The European Commission has launched this consultation about European strategy for data, which deadline is on 21st of May. So we encourage you to participate all together and give our position regarding this consultation, and we will share with you the document and explanation how to collaborate, and we will organize the first meeting in order to aggregate and make all together the conclusions and submit on time. And please stay tuned, because we have the next webinar, the second Open Day webinar on 14th of May at 10 o'clock in the morning. You will be informed, but please save the date for this webinar around digital innovation hubs, leveraging the ecosystems to boost business opportunity across domains, how to collaborate in these new ecosystems, digital hubs around the digitalization. And that's all for my side, Thorsten. Thank you, all of you, for your attendance.